Karajimbu Koneji Songyan Kosondo Jengu Dozardo So Minju Jenja Borane Dizamsan Jugan Junga Wani Razi Jugan Wazo Donzip Lama Namla Zorwande Ola Satene Linje Chudo Nabatsama Nyingong Dele Kyata Teda Lindo Teni Samba Sanjo Jodo Tokine Simbarkyo Teni Chitu Jirangalanga Gama Hyokayen Teni Chitu Jila Twatilindo Yuna Desi Yang Mina Mahya Tanta Tendru Twatilin Kwakabre Tekiyen Teni Twatilin De Tamake Tataranke Chuki Galiti Nandini Java Yobagitoni Teni Soso Nyamyangla Bandone Da Ganjo and Joa Malin Zoding Freedom Martin in the second 소소 그 냠냠라 바드네 당가서 냠니잖아 세코들이 다다 강라 간사는 냠니 세어저리 냠냠뇨 냠니 그 냠뇨리라 바드네 또바께 당거니 되네 저와리 자로 and 저와체 한도 되는 게리 간히히 나랑게 I do my best.
Good afternoon, my Dharma friends. I think what we could do this afternoon is I'll continue with our exploration of the text on page 255 for the first hour, and then we'll use the second hour this afternoon for Q&A. I encourage you to ask questions that are experiential in origin rather than theoretical, and to focus on the topic, but also especially based on your own experience, because all of you practice, and therefore what is of the principal importance is to apply everything you learn as practical instruction to inform your practice.
Teni da demcho nga so da somi rimi Lama tamjila soran de ko liri de da tombe ne tomba ni zong ko ya tombe tirap den da hingda ni jinjok bod sa tom bma la gaya dara na tan da na ke tamba jagar pinji kha ke her pardin ate khala soran de sone da de kare zogaliro nga so di Suzumasana Kadam Sanyanke Nimahi, the Kadam Dagelo, Zogun Takadam Nimba Zogun, Teni Mahokori, Takantariang, Teni Soran de Kole, Lama Tamjila, and a Telan Javak, Tony Holitina, Lama Mambon, Dondo, then the Tombe Tirap Dun Seria de Tambo, Tomba Sanji Hakja Tapan, Hena Pepsane. Di jiso sanje o songke teni sanje ke kai dowa thomaran zi oleri kai dowa tambo sanje ke chu tamji sanje ka pha songya yore ma to yekto de tikya le yo mare dikap dedu video to audio de ko yo mare de kap di kap sa le yongsu zoba de la mji bezong sre ya de ore sanje ka ma songya de thoma tamji mji bezong ke so so la gare tu yo ba de 조대 산지 오송 공나다 리코딩라고 오리 공나 리코딩라고 산지 오송 조벤 되니까 도와시니 갑설라 되니까도 담보때 마 주바 때때인데 tombe tirap 던조레 송레 tombe tirap 던송레 데 tombe tirap 선데 산지 오송 건가고 향의 그지 예배 더더가다 나보바 존에 되니 마 되니 tomba tirap region the chekti tini tendrike ke jobare son le tomba tirap dan zo le ta pha dom sek tendra ri insau ta leng thong la ma tho ko par ta tomba tirap dan zo le o le song ni leng thong ma tho pa teni te ke te la soran de ko le tirap dan se ya de hingda ni se ya so hingda se ya de ye char mandraba mambo hingda se ya de dangbo son je ba bo de di juba de ma kyungki de ni la hingda nam ni se ya da ko lo so yo de kap de du lodop yap se lodop do thomi da di la lodop de hingda Kong Nam Ni La Kum Chi Ni Zogo Na Ta Te Kong Nam Ni Kene Ma Ju Ni Te La Hinta Nam Ni Zene Sena Choko. Tini Ta Jinrong Choni Seya De Yongdari. Jinrong Jag Jinrong Choni Zo the Jinrong Ji Zone He called it. Jin Trou Zone He called Lotoni Agon the Jin Choni Zone Jiven He called Lokson Ramada Cherry and a Jag Maso Sanji Sons and Gini Nalinda Hedak Lopon So. Ta Pug Chuju Tramame Batosa Zote and Kepa Kona Batamjiri.
Jindro gets sent two drink so good.
Ta Jirog
Yin
Ri Nagan Yikol, Tommy, the Yini, Solan Chuda, Yontiu, Ariandeva, that Soja Lambota, the Mayorwa, Ladrop, Tommy, Zori, and the Tony, then Shaki you, Yontin you,
then a Yin chick, then a Dharmakirti chick,
really did it.
then a Chokji Longbo,
then it should drop a Solan Chuda.
Yeah, they draw Saturday.
Oh, that they get Jinto, that they Yongdari Manche Yoga.
No, but I'm still missing two. Yigi Tola Karia.
You get told I get number neither to you, you get told me to get Chilama, the Hina, that Lopon Yinita, Soja Lambota, Chuja Trapata, Yonti, that day Yonti, did it.
Guna Prabata, Shakya Prabha, Nika Ayer.
Re
The Yiginana Karia.
Yenana te you, then you saw the tateri. So on the thing, Mati got the Terry Tata de
Yuntin than Shaki.
Shaki with the Yonti Nikayo.
Durwaki.
Dorvago Zoto, Kona.
So that's 2, 3, 4.
Dorvago.
I got all 6.
Yeah, good. Terry, Tenny. Dorwag Zoton get a tati or Yoriwamag Zoton get tate, Yonda Pacha Manche Hakon the Corda, Manche Hakon the Cord, Pachang Hako, the Yellow Tokondoa, the so de Kichesane Chesari, the Chunsan.
That's at the then on the Gayadara Shiri, Smriti Jana Shiri, Dana Shri Sore. Then the Techenke Zazik Nana, Jindro.
Re done here power carrier. Game mixer Hakwami, Tate, Game mixer Hakwami, the so de
Shakya Shri did do like a berg to do a metal shot.
Oh, yeah.
Jenabaki Jova Carreri, metal to do Kajupaki.
Dahakwami, Doratu under Mendoko. They Thunder Mendoko.
Donna did so some
Gaso Manche de Ma in Doratu, so Domjon the Newman Juni, Minder Zoko, Lenda or Newman Juni read or that Kare and Dorwaka Corner, Yamyon Chemi, Teta Teddy. Teni Jindro Joni, but the Georgia Tori Pinji, Teni Tambaja Pinji, then Partia Atesha, George Partia Atesha, Temaroko the Sora, then they pull the cutting chiku check that, and Kitchen Boda Satota, Pinchim Bomala Mandrata, and Gorapimam Joneta, then it Tamba Jagarta, Tapadi Atesha, Tatazo the Pug, Yondaga Lamanga, so cutting chiku, the gentleman Pangasoka, Yamni going to take on here, Cordoa, then it's a Hakon, Godoa, Teddy, Tandorna, Tamjilas, or on their call.
So the next stanza mentions Indian, South Asian masters who were very influential in the teachings of the common vehicle, the Mahayana, and the Vajracharya, both in South Asia itself and subsequently in Tibet. First mentioned, so we're in the middle of page 255, our teacher's 7 successors. These are the 7 generations following the Buddha's passing. The Buddha's appointed successor as leader of the Buddhist Sangha was Mahakashyapa, or Kashyapa the elder. There were 2 Kashyapa brothers, and the older one is Mahakashyapa, who was one of the Buddha's first disciples and was the first person to lead the Sangha and convene the first of the great conventions of the Sangha which determined the codification of the teachings. And they, obviously, Lama said they didn't have modern technology. What they relied upon was the flawless memory or perfect recollection of the arhats who took part. And there are details of that first codification of the teachings and so on. So Kashyapa was the first leader of the Sangha after the Buddha's passing. And then after he passed away, it passed to the Buddha's cousin Ananda. And Ananda, who lived an extremely long life, was the next one, and then there were 5 more. And so those first 7 generations were the leaders of the Buddhist community after the Buddha. The 2 chariots refer here, the term chariot, Lama said, of course, is used in slightly different ways as a metaphor. Sometimes it will refer to a tradition, and often, as is the case here, to the leader or founder of that tradition, in which case the notion is that, like a chariot that leads the way, that person founded the tradition. So these traditions, which are sometimes also connected with 2 lineages of the Bodhisattva vow, the 2 chariots here refer principally to Arya Nagarjuna and Arya Sangha. And the Nagarjuna's lineage, which is the principal lineage of the middle way, is in the context of the Bodhisattva vow called the lineage of the profound view, and came down from the Bodhisattva Manjushri. And then the other one, which is the lineage of a Sangha, came from the Bodhisattva Maitreya, and in the context of the Bodhisattva vow is called the lineage of extensive deeds. Nevertheless, these 2 great masters, Nagarjuna and Asanga, founded their own distinct traditions of Mahayana study, and therefore are considered supreme. Now, the ones mentioned after them, the 6 chariots, Lama said this is tricky because different lists are always can vary a bit, but sometimes they'll say the 8, in which case they're including Nagarjuna and Asanga. But the 6 chariots are the 6 other Indian masters and scholars who have most influenced, aside from those 2, aside from Nagarjuna and Asanga, who have most influenced the teachings of the Tripitaka. So the Vinaya, in the case of 2 of them, the Sutras, and the Abhidharma. So the first 2 were 2 teachers whose explanation of the Vinaya of the Mula Sarvastivadin school, which is the tradition of Vinaya that all Tibetan monastics have received, were both called Prabha, light. One is Guna Prabha, which means light of qualities, and the other is Shakya Prabha, which means light of Buddha Shakyamuni. Then the Abhidharma was principally sustained by Asanga's brother, Vasubandhu. So the third one is Vasubandhu. And then Dharmakirti, there are 2 very famous Dharmakirtis. One is the Indian Dharmakirti, which is this one, and then there's the Sumatran Dharmakirti, who was a master of Atishas. And they usually avoid confusion by just calling the other Dharmakirti, the Sumatran Dharmakirti, the Sumatran. So when we say Dharmakirti here, we mean the Indian Dharmakirti, who was a previous life of the Jawang Karmapa, and was the founder of the tradition of Buddhist logic or valid cognition that is studied in our tradition. And then the two others are Dignaga, who I think was also a logician and philosopher, and then Aryadeva, who was among Arya Nagarjuna's disciples, one of the best known, and composed his own treatises, such as the 400 stanzas and so forth, and whose works we still study today. So these two chariots and the 6 ornaments of Jambudvipa are these 8 great Indian masters. Then we turn to those who were particularly, although themselves from South Asia, particularly influential on Tibetan Buddhism. The first is the Bodhisattva Shantarakshita. Shantarakshita, who according to some accounts was from Kashmir and according to others from other parts of South Asia, was the first Buddhist master invited by King Trisong Detsen. And it was at Shantarakshita's, he was a monastic and a great philosopher. We still study his ornament to the middle way. And, but it was at his suggestion that Guru Rinpoche was invited. So just as we consider Guru Rinpoche the founder, as it were, of the Vajracharya in Tibet, Shantarakshita was the founder of the Vinaya and the study of the sutras in Tibet. And then Vimala. Vimala, which of course is a very common Indian name, stainless. Vimala here refers to Vimala Mitra. And Vimala Mitra, who was also generally said to have been from Kashmir, was we would best say, a peer of Guru Rinpoche's. He was one of Guru Rinpoche's teachers, but also they were co-disciples of the same teacher, Shri Singha. Vimala Mitra he also did teach the Vinaya in Tibet, but principally he's remembered for his transmission of his particular presentation of the heart essence teachings of Dzogchen. So when the heart essence teachings are spoken of, they usually talk about the 2 heart essences, with the teachings of Vimala Mitra and the teachings of Guru Rinpoche. Gayadhara was an Indian Siddha and Pandit who came to Tibet later, during the time of the later propagation. And he's very important because his teachings, he transmitted the teachings of the Mahasiddha Virupa to what became the lineage of the path and result. So Gayadhara was one of the important links between the Indian and the Tibetan traditions of what we generically call the New Tantras. Smriti Jnana, which as hard as it is to say, actually is an easy to remember name. Smriti means mindfulness or memory, and Jnana means wisdom. Smriti Jnana was a teacher who came to Tibet in the 11th century, whose teachings are not carried on uniquely by any one lineage, but are found in the Treasury of Oral Instructions and have survived down to the present day. Dhanashri, I asked Lama, he said, I don't know. So we don't know who Dhanashri was. Dana means generosity, Shri means glorious or splendid, but which particular lineage he's connected with, I don't know. And then glorious Atisha, of course. Atisha was the West Bengali great yogi and later monastic pandit who came to Tibet at the end of the 10th century and who revived the somewhat dormant teachings of the Buddha in Tibet. So this is a list of people other than Guru Rinpoche who were likewise very, very kind and are not particularly associated with only one or another lineage. Their teachings are studied, for the most part, by all Tibetan Buddhists.
All so. That did it. That's sort of Tata Bola de Nandin Lama Yongdag Garden Chiku de Nandin Hejan Rawata Karri Sena, that Lama Yongzo the Garden Chimbori. Then Yongdag Karri readers in the Pinjim Bamala Mandra data, George Pardia de Chatenia, Pem Sipa Garden Chimbo Korani, Pinji Jata Lama Sons of Dede. Takanda yang te bama hing te zone pula tari jarbolama kongke tekar de nang ne ana pinchin bama la mandra de pula kariri ne kadin chigi chigri ko lisena bero zana de kap te de pe kaplen thio yana pinchin bama la mandra pula songo ma bero zana de tin kaplen thimina bero zana rawo pinchin bama le gongna magarna Ola yori zogo zoma kebataw koni gomba nyam lama cheri ikyar sanghari de tendrikya ke keba la parto kongge dreva ke tekbala zoba chembola ko lobjang haleba ke seidene bulan dreva ke tekbate ngone tane ke kongge tapawine zormi tok zormi ke tekbate lamsang kon dreva ngade jonne 산제적 공부 탑주 요바게 든득게 큐드 거기서는 jar보게 대 공게 든득게 냠네 랍장외네 보일마 다르네 대니 보니 때서 갑대도 갑len 트인 공나 다도서 남타 상례면 되나나 어리데 갑len 트공 점모 차와노나 마 송고 타네 우르 춘거 jar보 대니 춘거 히라 거사 마라네 롬보 들론다만다게 대니 다마달람니 추로리 대니 다마데베 추리 세칸 다마다제네 Kong Kablet in the Jamor Sawaron Mason, the Tijip Pinchim Bamala Mata Dintan, Pinchim Bamala Matake, the Nico Tendo, Drevaka Tekbamana, Joy Tekba, so Sinan, Teni Gini Pinchim Bamala Puda Sonda Hakone, Tendrika Arjo Mambo Sawaron Mason, Teni George Party Atechake, Yala the Kong Chukarin Ankada in the Toajam. Kongu chute joy tekba jajama ton revo ke tekba nakam da song o tate jim tate ke pink mari song ne tene kangdarya tene kong yodanim bo bula nga ne tene te sare ramadan trap jek de ne tene te kale kale pinchim bama la mandra ke tene pin tata nga so lo za bero za na te pe ha le pa ke 강무치를 getini 담배 지워인사 콩을 사바인사 손에 되니 다 소라담네 되니 참하게 이진라වෙ네 되니 메로잖아요 보여서 되니 뭐말하면 좀 자나를 손서서 전부 요 말로 등기서 제요나 던저리는데 메로잖아도 양원도 결이한다고 메로잖아 그 중거도 거죠 고감라고데 빈진 뭐말하면 락세올이래나 이제 조kin데 다르다올이 잘못 사와는 조어데 마다올이 때 에나 든득하게 돈이 빈진 범말만라도 배 가진 침본다고 든득해 레디올에 되니 교제 파디아데 기 마고바리 조 상하는 개바 용작은 개바 든득해 빈자다리데 에나 볼라 디갑데 데사르 추가 갈렌티데 갑서 공게 특바 침보 추코나 로정데 송네 보기 추데라 할레바케가 자마 장장 야보조 타월리 되는데 되니 코나바니라네 용작게 가서 특바 침보다 람 상하니라 Garden Chimbonda Charlie the Lama.
Among these Indian masters or South Asian masters, Padampa Sanjay, of course, and so on, the predominant in the effect they had on the influence they had on Tibet are Atisha and Vimalamitra. There would have been no particular need to invite Vimalamitra to Tibet, except that the translator, the Tibetan translator Vajracharya, had been expelled, had been banished from Tibet, because Vimalamitra and Vajracharya, like Guru Rinpoche himself, were all disciples of the same master, Shri Singha. What happened was that the king, Trisong Detsen, asked, when they were training the first generation of Tibetan translators, and if you read the long biographies of Guru Rinpoche, such as the one Lama mentioned, the Copper Island Testament. I forget what it's called in English. And, or the even longer one, the Testament of Padma. And there are also two biographies of Vajracharya that have been translated. One's called The Great Image, and was translated, that's from the oral Dzogchen tradition, that was translated by a nun many, many years ago. And then the other one's a Terma of Jongolodutai, and I translated that. It's the yellow book. I don't know, I don't see it anymore. You can't get it online. Anyway, if you read any of these historical texts, Vajracharya, the translator Vajracharya from Bhagavad was the best and the most outstanding of the first generation of Tibetan, indigenous Tibetan translators. And so he was sent by Trisong Detsen with a specific aim that he bring back the teachings of the effortless vehicle, the teachings of Dzogchen. So he went to India and studied with many masters, but specifically he studied with the great master Siddhi and Vidyadhara, Sri Singha, who had been Guru Rinpoche's guru also. Now, Sri Singha taught Vajracharya a great deal, perhaps all, of the Dzogchen teachings, quite secretly, and you can read the details about how they did this. And the reason it had to be secret was that there was a prophecy known to the Buddhist kings of various Indian city-states that the essence of the Buddha Dharma might be lost to a northern country. And they had the kings who had this worry that if the Dzogchen in particular were taught to Tibetans, that it would disappear from India. And so somehow it got out that Sri Singha had taught, he was known to have taught other, Sri Singha himself was not Indian, he was Chinese, but for some reason we call all the others by Tibetan names, even though they were Indian. Sri Singha, who was not Indian, we call by his Indian name. I don't know, it's Dzogchen humor. But anyway, so then Sri Singha taught Vajracharya, and somehow it got out. And so when Vajracharya had got back to Tibet, the people in India who resented the teachings having been shared with a Tibetan monk and translator, sent word to the king of Tibet and to his ministers that what Vajracharya was bringing back was not Buddha Dharma, but was black magic, evil magical spells. Which of course it wasn't. And at that time, the court of Trisong Detsen was split between the supporters of Buddhism and the old Bumpo religious nationalists who felt that since the Bön religion was an indigenous Tibetan religion, that their whole way of life and their whole sense of who they were, and especially these were ministers, so their position, their wealth, and so on, was dependent upon Bön being the only religion. They resented the fact, and this has happened in several Buddhist countries, they resented the fact that an Indian religion was being imported because they felt that that made Tibet culturally in some way subservient to India. And this had happened centuries before also in China and so on. And, So the word got to the ministers who weren't wild about Buddha Dharma to begin with, and they made false accusations against Vajracharya. You can read about these in the biographies. And they asked the king to execute him. And so the king eventually talked them down to banishment. And so the Vajracharya was banished to a place called Jelmo Tsawarong, which means the hot defile or hot valley of the Queen. I don't know where it is. So he was banished from central Tibet, from Lhasa area, and he eventually, of course, started teaching, having disciples in Gyamtso, and especially he taught another Tibetan who's called Yudran Yingpo, and whom we generally enumerate among Guru Rinpoche's disciples because he eventually studied with Guru Rinpoche as well. Now, because Vajracharya had been banished, the king asked Vimalamitra to come and teach. And initially, Vimalamitra, he did come and teach, but initially he only taught the common vehicle. He taught things like the Vinaya and the sutras and so forth. And he didn't say a word about Dzogchen. And by this point, Yudran Yingpo had gone to central Tibet and was attending these lectures, these assemblies. And when Vajracharya asked him, he said, the great Pandit, Vimalamitra, my Dharma brother, what is he teaching? And they said, well, he mostly only talks about the Vinaya and, the common teachings. And Vajracharya said, well, that's not right. That's a waste. I mean, he's the greatest, So then Yudran Yingpo secretly communicated with Vimalamitra, that there are some of us who are in the know, will you please teach what you... And he did. And Vajracharya was eventually allowed back, and the whole thing was kind of exposed, and you can read the story of this in the two biographies of Vajracharya and the other ones. So, to bring you up to date, Vajracharya is now the Jamgon Rinpoche's. He was many other, a series of many other lamas through the centuries, and now we would call them the Jamgon Rinpoche's. Atisha, that's mostly about Vimalamitra, but a lot about Vajracharya. And then Atisha, interestingly, was originally a tantrika. Everyone thinks of him as the sort of great monastic and exponent of the common vehicle, but he was initially a tantrika. And then he had a vision of Buddha Shakyamuni, who said to him, why have you not yet completely entered my teachings? And so he became a monk, and he became extremely learned in every aspect of Buddha Dhamma. And because of various events in his life, Lama didn't tell the whole story, so I won't. It's just, he ended up receiving a prophecy from Tara that the way he could complete his purification was to spend the last 12 years of his life in a gloomy and bedraggled country filled with human demons, and that was Tibet. So he went there, and when he came there, of course, Atisha by that point was the embodiment of the Mahayana mind training that he's known to have taught. So he initially brought a particularly disagreeable, he was West Bengali himself, but a particularly disagreeable tea servant boy from West Bengal, so that he not be, because he figured these Tibetans, they've been Buddhists for 200-300 years, they're going to treat me really, really well. I won't be able to practice mind training. I'll have nothing to be patient with. He'd been in Tibet 3 days, and he said, well, I didn't have to bring that tea boy. So Atisha was requested by the kings who invited him to not emphasize the Vajrayana too much, and to primarily teach the Mahayana and the common vehicle, and so he did. But it's not that Atisha did not know the Vajrayana, because we have works by him in Sanskrit connected with the White Kacharya and many other tantric deities. So he taught what he was asked to teach. But because he was able to create this fantastic revival of Tibetan Buddhism, he's considered, Atisha and Vimalamitra are considered particularly kind to Tibetan Buddhism.
Da deriro. Hola so teni tin chane da marpa kajuri. Ngazo da marpa kajur thori. Marpa kaju kandrekhe ne ma taryo me te kaju soran dev kolo. Kabak chuo yindu telo pa tukhin ji ta naro me tya marpa lo cha kongthang malare chomi gambo pa la soran de songje te ta te marpa kajuri. Ta marpa kaju la yongda ka marpa kajuri. Kaju te la te tapo kaju ala ri te yongda ka marpa kajuri ngazo chayong chan hi na teni kabak chundu te korte charan so telo naro ke nam thar sorto che namba kale kale zaina yapo le telo pala ngala mai lama mi song le tambo ngai lama thoba dorjen cha song yana maso yi ma chi na gurun bo je te na gi le maso yi ma chi na ko tan che ke lama mi le mar dorjen cha ni te ka de chu sin so ne kan de maso yi ma chi yi chi bo wa ke serto Kababya Lama tin son konga Kababya Lama tin sa yoli la drop ta zarya lava pa karazamo ngayen Kababya Lama yen son Kababya Lama tin so yori telo pa ke teni telo pa kapsa teni ta jani pe chimambo son sa ka loji yori ti ko ta tripchi ji la so ba ta tripchi ji ta te yongda ka kare na ta tripchi ja cha ta tripchi ji Karena te loma de yongda pe de naro ta metrapa la sopari naro metra partin naro pa nga so yongda ka ha kori marpa lo za khong ga lama ni zo lama ni churo de sakji ni tabdre ni ka lama ni o le khong zo ni tablam naro churo ga lama de telo ba da trolam saja chembo ga lama de metrapa song Tene metrapa ke loma de ke te ma juba de sakchi karpo chik thawo jo ne nga so nyamlin saja chembo nyamlin se ya yoba de deri ta saja chembo to zoba chembo se ya de saja chembo se ya de yongka bo ngai na ni ke ka ole ri se ne hili loksor khada saja chembo se ya de mere de dada donje ngo chorcha de hibza namkin zu da zu heba na ge ja ge tripchin pa tham je ke doha se ya mangbo song ya le yo ri dohan ra ma 도하 대나 책철라는 마 영zam니 대라 사자 첨보서야다 또서 맹다로 거리리 도하 대나니 철라니 송거 대나 철라 데니 대라 대리 다 맹학 거리 다 맹학 거 메트샵 마르파로자 공탐마라데 마르파로자 제나 다 보라 가든 치휴 로자와나게 야휴 마이나니 두휴 최저글로 맹문의 도큐 라인문의 야휴젤랜다 맹문의 도큐 컨트롤 차고 해당 차고 세간다 파 몽어 때나 빼면서 뭐 할래바지게 야동 깨자 레라고 히로 메위 말에 든르게 그 무구르 요르 마르바로자 세야 돼 마르바로자 때 담비추를 찡 마티나 열롱데 파자 마르바로자 그 밀라 라자 총검 밀라 세인도 삼도 거리 든르게 그 참바 뭐 유츠보 든르게 그 말에 열레 마르바로자 세야 돼 Teni tate de jane a konga ko photos na dombe hera kai nam to jag tripchi ma to so ge loju chirap teni boin marba loza da te sodro mo je ko na ba ge chirap khasa marba loza ge trba mambo son dire teni de marba loza se ya de ka den chin ja lama chek phula de teni ju thamji ge sage kani rimi ge ju thamji phok tok san rawo de marba loza ge jore ni tin jor de yakhun rawo la za ho de de Tene deal forma contam Milarepa to Pogu Zari, Pogu Lama Jason Gagan the drum. Tene ko Cetela Gotse Tenila, Chin Tupa Zamjing is on Indra Don Yonju Tabli Tandraka. Mala say at the Chin Tupa Zamjing is on Gadon, Jago Mogos on his own Romogos on the Tendrika Contanga Milarepa, Jolly Pogu Tane, Lama Jason Gagan the drum, Pula Tendrika Lama Joma, Marva Loza Garisong Banagi. 다다 그 먹 삼열은 대파 말발로자가 콘나 주데 그 탐지 그 왕만당네 갑레 제사 되네 콘글레가 차상 주사 라먹 제송가 드사 대거를 물론 남타나 적대나 말발로자라 마마보 컨트롤한 걸 던르게 거리 더제 대가르다 삼나다나 오코코 던르게 그 샤차 닝게오게 로마도 그 가리세네 콜 추만당레나 삼네 던르게 생기 삼노동게 망보들이 에나 말아레바데 공게 데바다 드바 장고들이 데바다 드바 만자나 용디 저저거 또방한테 열타고 말이 대인도 말아레바게 나모 랑게동도 드마모 떨차르도 랑동도 Randa Amaki, the Dramambo, Mamambo Sitara, the Daba Majana, the Dramajana, the Topa Jula Mache, do Nasoka, Hundro Yoga, Sawa Teddy, Naso the Drip Chimbo Yori, then the Drip the Pa Madana, Tobang on the Giorgio Mari, then the Drip Jankovichito, Milarepa, Lama, Cont'd Milarepa, see, Pula Tendrika, Naropa, Mala Sansargosa. Jag trupchi na pinchin naropa ga tene marpa lo zala Milarepa chin tu ni chin tupa zamje sangsom hambam haram na kangla nyama khandra wa tupa ga ji sawa de jivte la ku sa cha song ne sang pu pa hare ne ma khong ge san sa ne re dat tundrike re tene pinchin naropa ga Kong Loma la Tendrike Yobaka Sansaro de Sanso, Tender Sansa, Sampuba Harani, King Naxartambia, Mala Pul and Gogosore, Sandokoli, Put Madokari, the Yabo Zawani in Mari, Manjun, Simbuyor, Seriate, the swords in the book on Jinjong, the Yabori, the swords in the Data Jo, Padin Adekak Sumbadangiri, Nagamado, Tigo Hamir, Pukoran, Nalola, the Zubala, Tossing, Dosong Jazawa, Demba Dinjari. Dina ne kamgamala lelaw mari ana je chula nyamni si ne lama lama cha cha de ha leba ke nyamni si thamkin da pha zo yi chi jin kin da de ba da na mu sin kin ke mari ri de lelaw ke pha char mari den de ke ori kong tha mala re ba sin sin te ba sam jing de dan jin di loma de de ne kap sa chu jing de dambo ka dam ba ke loma ri gambo ba de dambo min ba ri Mimba de Kona Nama Yori, Bogo Yori, Makeda Chimbori, Nama Bogo Teni, Bogotamji Hia, Teni Nama Hia, Teni Dela Coraling in Jong Jene, Gadamba Chula Hill. Then Gadamba Chula Hill, Georgie Yapse, Jason Drang, Teni Kong Pem Halebaka Love Jong Yamnisi. Teni Kong Yongdraga Kong Hunja Lewanga Lama. Munje lega lama ori so sola teni gyapsam Milarepa hindu repa Milarepa tin sin tupa samje kong teni toba jule che sin tupa samje kong lama ji yol mus mewa cha teni Milarepa den song teni kong dawa dingire la nyamni si ne Milarepa den chu chu in the capsula teni kong ha le pa ke pichin cha sonari Milarepa le pichin ni yo banani pichin chia de gambo pare teni tata repa ge jupa de Dikaps, Tinghar Pula, Tawak Juba Zelenda, Heda Manastra Heda Miri, Teni Gambo Pani Ma, Teni Gelongetini, called Repak Juba and Zen, Teni Kapsa Joe Jingdizo, Teni Dijiso, Tak Tapoka Juzo, Lira Yonda Chari, Tendrika Ma Soakaloju, Yopa Ti Chutela, Marakajula, Sumi Gambo Pata, Partatin, Te Lama de la Sorata.
Now, the third stanza principally referred to the Guru Rinpoche and the other progenitors of what we would now call the Nyingma tradition. Of course, originally it wasn't called the Nyingma tradition because there wasn't a new tradition to compare it to. It was just Tibetan Buddhism. But eventually, after the resurgence of Buddhism led by Tisha and the sponsorship of the Dharma kings who invited him, then there were these two traditions, the original tradition, what was called the early propagation or the ancient lineage, and then the new traditions. So now we turn, after the mention of those Indian masters who were instrumental to the study and practice of all traditions, we now turn to the three principal or best known branches of what is collectively called the Sarma or new tradition. So these are the Kagyu, Sakya, and Gelug in the order that we'll be looking at them. Now the term Kagyu in general, Ka can mean the Buddha's teachings, the Buddha's words, the Buddha's commands, the Buddha's instructions, and Jut means lineage. So in general, the term Kagyu can really be applied to many different teachings. But principally nowadays, it's most commonly used of the tradition that was brought to Tibet by the Tibetan translator Marpa Chichilodru. Somewhat confusingly for foreigners, we use two different names to refer to that tradition. In the reference to the original introducer of it to Tibet, we call it the Marpa Kagyu. But sometimes, because it was so much influenced and widely propagated or founded as an institution by the peerless Lord Gampopa, or the physician from Dokpo, we sometimes call it the Dokpo Kagyu. Anyway, this lineage from Marpa, Milarepa, and Gampopa is the one that is most commonly called Kagyu. And of course, as you know, it has these 12 subdivisions, the 4 primary divisions and the 8 secondary divisions. The beginning, however, of this lineage, like all other lineages with the exception of one, is in India. And the what we call the Kagyu teachings appeared first with a person who we typically call by the name of one of his occupations, the Sesame Man, or Tilopa. Because at one point during his training, he ground sesame seeds for a living, at least during the day. His actual name, confusingly, was Prajnabhadra, or good, we would say wisdom or knowledge or intellect and so on. But nobody calls him that now. They just say Telopa or Tilita or something like that. Now, Tilopa, like Guru Rinpoche, was someone who did not actually need human teachers. Therefore, Tilopa once famously said, and is widely quoted as having said, "I, Tilopa, have no human guru." But again, much like Guru Rinpoche a few centuries earlier, no one believed him. They thought he was a charlatan. So he demonstrated receiving the teachings in a fairly traditional way by the standards of Mahasiddhas, and he received 4 different lineages or dispensations. One was the lineage of Nagarjuna, in his case focused primarily on the Father Tantra of Guhya Samaja. One was the lineage of Lavapa, which means the blanket wearer, which was a lineage of Chakrasambhara. One was another lineage of Chakrasambhara, the lineage of Krishnacharya, who was also a previous life of the Jamgon Rinpoches. And one was the lineage also of Mother Tantra that came from the Wisdom Dakini Sukha Siddhi. Now, sources differ as to whether they were his teachers or they were the progenitors of the lineages he received. But in any case, he combined those tantric teachings of what were called the 4 lineages into one system of instruction, which, if practiced as the path of means, is what we now know of as the 6 dhammas, typically named after one of his disciples, Naropa, so the 6 dhammas of Naropa. And if practiced as the path of liberation, the Mahamudra. Now, he passed these 4 lineages on to his many disciples, of whom of principal note for us was the great Kashmiri Pandit Naropa. And Naropa had, before meeting Tilopa, already been an erudite Buddhist master and scholar, but what he encountered when he received the teachings and transmission of his guru Tilopa was something completely different. that went entirely beyond the conceptual mind and any conventional mode of instruction. So their lineage came to be called the lineage of 4 dispensations or 4 branches. And some people say that Kaju is actually an abbreviation of Kabapchi Jupa. But anyway, it refers to the lineage of Tilopa and Naropa. Now, the 8 Mahasiddhas mentioned here are almost primordial figures. These are figures who are considered to appear in every pure realm, and therefore they're in every mandala. But they include great Indian Buddhist siddhas like the King Indrabhuti and many others. And Lama didn't go through them in detail, so I don't have to. Now, since we are concerned here with the teachings of Naropa remain widely practiced in 2 nations, aside from the foreign or non-Asian diaspora. And these are Tibet, where they were brought by Marpa, and Nepal. And the lineage of Naropa that exists in Nepal is not one that was reintroduced from Tibet. It goes back to 2 of Naropa's Nepali students, and is an unbroken tradition that is still present. It's very hidden. It's mostly kept within families. You know who the families are because they're identified as families of Vajracharyas, but they do not share it outside the thing. And in fact, they can't even answer you directly if you ask them, are you a practitioner of this? You just see evidence of it. And so they keep the very strict samaya that everyone is supposed to keep. They really keep it. Because it's a pluralistic society. Not everybody in Nepal is Buddhist, although many are. Many of the people who don't identify as Buddhist are secretly Buddhist, and so on. But you know, in Tibet, because almost everybody was Buddhist, we got kind of lackadaisical about secrecy. But you know, here we're going to need to learn, you know, as things tighten up a bit, we're going to need to learn how to be a little discreet, probably. So the lineage of Naropa still exists in the Kathmandu Valley and probably in other parts of Nepal as well. Now, Naropa was not Marpa's only Indian guru. Naropa also studied with, among many others, a nobleman or prince, Milarepa, who had also been one of Atisha's teachers and peers at Nalanda. Generally speaking, we say that what he learned from Naropa was the Vajrayana aspect, the 6 dharmas of Naropa, and what he learned from Milarepa was principally the Mahamudra. It's a little more complicated than that because they both practiced both. But generally speaking, we say that Marpa's preeminent root guru was Naropa, and second only to Naropa was Prince Milarepa. And so the instructions of Milarepa largely focused upon the single principle of Yilamijepa, the freedom from mental engagement or engagement of the intellect are very, very much prized. Now Lama said, with regard to this Mahamudra, or Great Seal, that Marpa taught, we don't find the term Mahamudra, Great Seal, in the texts of the sutras per se, such as the 5 great treatises of the 5 topics of the sutras. It shows up in Vajrayana Tantras, but it's used in different ways at different times. What is this emphasis on Mahamudra? Principally, it was in India an oral tradition, a lineage, that was also, we find in terms of literature, principally carried in the realization songs or dohas, such as the trilogy of dohas of the great Brahmin Saraha, who was also now the Jawan Karmapa, and so forth. So Mahamudra is like Dzogchen, a teaching that really comprises the essence of all the Buddha's teachings in one point. And so it can be presented in different ways, and preeminently, we owe the continued presence of the practice lineage of Mahamudra per se, Path of Liberation, to Lord Mapa and his disciples, and especially his grand disciple, the peerless Gampopa, to whom we'll return in a minute. Now we come to the first Tibetan among the Kagyu. And Marpa, it's easy for Lama to say because it doesn't sound as bad in Tibetan. But when we talk about him, Marpa was probably one of the greatest individuals who has ever walked this earth. His current incarnation, of course, is Taisa Rinpoche. And everyone knows that. Apparently, Shri Singha was reborn in India as the Dombi Hiruka, the great Mahasiddha of the Vajracharya, and then Dombi Hiruka was intentionally born in Tibet as Marpa. After his life as Marpa, Siddhi said here he was the Gampopa's nephew, Dagom, Sutrim Nyingpo, at which time he was a friend of Barompa, who was, of course, now part of Rinpoche, and so on. These things you know. But anyway, Marpa was not a monk. He was one of the heirs, principally the eldest son, I think, of a large dairy farming clan called Marpa. And his parents and just about everybody else, when he was young, as Lama pointed out, just didn't know what to do with him. He was unmanageable. He was someone who, as his father once said, if you don't get out of here, I don't know which is going to happen. You're going to get killed, or you're going to kill somebody else, or you're going to destroy this whole area. He lived in southern Tibet, in Lodok, Drolong. So he said, I think that the best thing to do would be to get you an education, get you away from here. And so they sent him to Drogme Lotsa and other Tibetan translators, but he didn't have a karmic connection with them. So eventually Marpa, having learned some degree of fluency in Indic languages, decided to go to India himself. And he took much of his patrimony, exchanged it for gold, and went to India, which of course his family kind of supported because it got him out of the way. I mean, India, that's some distance, it's hard to get to, good. Yeah, the farther the better. And Marpa became, of course, as everyone knows, a preeminent disciple of Naropa. And as Naropa himself said, he is representative or regent for the northern land of Tibet. The thing about Marpa was, if you were to look, Lama said, for a guru, you could not find a guru anywhere. But if you were to look for a more disagreeable human being, you would have trouble finding one. It's not really for me to say. I mean, Lama did say it, and I'm supposed to translate. I mean, he was very difficult, and fully awakened being, exhibited all kinds of miracles, like sending his consciousness into inconvenient corpses to walk them, of animals, and walk them off to a place where they wouldn't cause diseases and so on. And, the best way to talk about Marpa is that as Kalaramsa used to put it, we know that Marpa was great because of Milarepa. You know, if Marpa had not been who he was, Milarepa couldn't have become who he was. But Marpa was kind of, Lama says, he's the kind of person who if you talk to them, they might not answer you. If they do, it might not be nice. He was a tough guy. He was a tough guy. And he had to be a tough guy to do what he did. So he put Milarepa through extraordinary trials and tribulations. And the thing about Milarepa was, Milarepa was born with tremendous goodness of personality. But he was subjected in his childhood and early adolescence to the betrayal of some of his relatives, impoverishing his mother, his sister, and himself. And so his mother sent him off to learn magical killing, and he got very good at it and killed about 37 people. So when he went to study, eventually with Marpa, Marpa wasn't his first Buddhist teacher, he was very devoted to Marpa, even from before he met him, from when he heard his name. But Marpa realized that to cleanse Milarepa of the stain of what he had done at his mother's urging, he had to put him through terrible ordeals, and he did. And as a result, based on Marpa's apparently harsh treatment of Milarepa and his subsequent transmission, Milarepa became probably the uniquely preeminent example of Buddhahood in one lifetime. What he did in that life was so incredible that it was said by him, and it's been said by many others since, that anyone who even hears the name Milarepa Dorje, the name of Milarepa, will never be reborn in a lower state, a lower realm, ever again. Because he demonstrated to an astonishing degree the effectiveness of what the Buddha taught by achieving perfect awakening in that otherwise afflicted body. Now, Milarepa lived a life, as most of you know, and Lama said at this point, you should read the biographies of these people, the life of Milarepa, the songs of Milarepa, the life of Marpa. All of these things are available in English. Milarepa lived a life of extreme asceticism, but was not a monastic. So during the time of Marpa and Milarepa, there was no real monastic institution or presence for our tradition. The old monasteries of the Nyingma tradition had mostly been destroyed under the persecution between the two. Now there are many, but they were dated after this. The Nyingma lineage that survived was transmitted initially by lay people under the aegis of Nupchen Sanji Yeshe. And Marpa and Milarepa themselves had followers, but they didn't create institutions. And Milarepa had many disciples, but two of them are preeminent. One of them was called his sunlight disciple, the peerless Gampopa, and the other one is called his moonlight disciple, Rechungpa, which means the younger Repa, or cotton-clad one. And Rechungpa continued the lifestyle, more or less, of his guru, Milarepa. And so he transmitted some of Milarepa's secret teachings, which are now called the Nyingju, or the ear-whispered lineage, or oral but A-U-R-A-L lineage, which is found in the most, obviously, it's held by all Kajupas, but principally we find it in the Sarmang Kaju, the Barong Kaju, the Drukpa Kaju, and also, of course, in the Drikung and the rest. The other of Milarepa's great disciples, and the one who has tremendous historical significance, was the physician of Dokpo, the Lord Gampopa. And Gampopa, whose personal name was Sunam Rinchen, or Precious Merit, was a physician, hence the name Physician of Dokpo. And he had a wife and children. And there was an epidemic of some kind, as happened not infrequently in the 11th century. And first his children and then his wife passed away. Now, as she was dying, his wife asked him to, rather than trying to start another family, to enter the teachings, to become a monk. And as that was also his natural wish, after his wife's passing, Gampopa became a monk of Atisha's Kadampa tradition. And he studied with many great masters of that tradition and mastered those teachings. And then he heard the name of Milarepa, and it was like a lightning bolt in his heart. And so he went to see Milarepa. And then what happened was that Milarepa knew Gampopa was coming and mentioned to one of his disciples, he said, "Oh, someone's going to come see me who's a 10th level bodhisattva. You know, it's really important." And somehow either that disciple or somebody else said it to Gampopa, and which caused him a brief moment of obscuration because he thought, wow, a 10th level bodhisattva. Well, he was, of course, but you know, it didn't help him to hear it. And so Milarepa didn't see him for 2 weeks, and then did, and the rest, as they say, is history. And so if you read the life of Milarepa, there's an excellent account of his interchange and his guiding of Gampopa. Now, because Gampopa himself was a monastic, he really founded the monastic tradition, which became what we now think of as the Kaju. And it has, you know, the 4 original branches produced by Gampopa's original disciples, the Barom Kaju from Barompa, the Karma Kaju from the first Jalon Karmapa, and anyway, there are 4. One of his original disciples didn't actually found a separate lineage. He eventually became Tralik Rinpoche's, but he didn't create he mostly liberated non-humans and beings on the Bardo. Anyway, there are 12 because the things subdivide now. So that is about the Marpa Kaju, or because of it becoming widespread, the Dokpo Kaju, the lineage of Marpa, Milarepa, and Gampopa. And it's one of the 4 main or largest lineages of Tibetan Buddhism. Didn't it?
Yeah. That didn't Tawata Salin, anything Johnny Kaju Che, Jenny Mari, and the Sajagelo, Lama Tamjilem, Kri. And that day, something like on the Tawaraka, you didn't mean that on heat and under Kari to Sulamatoko, the he got it to Sutulatang, your Mari Chanaso, to Sutulatang, Saling Echerans, to Sutulatangana, Nani Panjon, Sanyanya Jekri.
So I will stop here. The text will go on and go through the branches of the Dokpo Kaju or Marpa Kaju, and then also mention gurus of the 2 remaining traditions, the Sakya tradition and the Giluk tradition. But if you have any questions, please go ahead. And if you run out of questions, then I'll resume, because I don't want to waste your time. If I waste your time, considering you made the effort of coming here or listening online, then I would go to hell, and I don't want that. So I'm not going to waste your time. That's a very Tibetan expression. So I don't want to waste your time. You know, like think if I do this wrong, I'll go to hell. I don't want to go to hell, so I'm not going to do that.
Thank you, Lama. So I'm just going to admit that I have trouble with Dharmapalas. I don't really understand them. I don't really know what to do with them. And I don't know if it's a cultural thing or... So I guess I'm just asking for more advice about how I sort of put it together with, Guru Yoga, Yidam practice. What could you give some advice about that?
The market, Lama la soa devju dang, Lama na zhe gom ju dang, Yidam lai nyempa la sopa de zo ge donda raksam haku yoris. Chichong la suka puwa de mixer ge gapa dang, penyon dang, de zo zani jumes, jishina lompa ge lukso madawa chi yena mishiti, chichong ge gapa dang, dona chichong ge gapa karere.
다 추종 그 거바데 김치니 그거는 건습지 차다 동담지 차는 니신이 희진의 초거리 강다양 가서 다다 뭐는 차딜 뭐는 가서 야라 마치야다 단 자차이나 파마다 되니 부지다 되니 다다 제 대치야라 송송킨젤랜다 레홍나 된다 고성셀랜다 도가서 포트레이션 포트레이트 가서 송접신게 남의 소속의 세찬이기나 던져외는 야리에칸세야를 접대오리 남게 동지찬이기나 차상된 소속의 샘나 접대요데 디라완 탑차우나 고흐요 말이 대인도 담아팔아세야데 니마레 우레 서기한다 마 라쟁니 쟁르 쟁니 쟁르 마투니 리마도 제가 카할라 로서 쳐바메와 동지찬이 기가오리 강따리야 도도도 희잖아 가서 상하게 냠니 세고도 틀려좀게 가서 내가 좀게 거로 가서라 직딩 그 남도 나 가서 샘나 남도로 우찬이 정데 가서 로바 생긴 거 한다 로바 생긴데 추종세야 될 삼노 적 동연데 야담사게 틀려지세 보트바리 대 담지게 초라는 응보 르견 통점이나 응비 건데 동점진 거 추기 경우 강사를 버기 경우 버기 경우 종케데 추종시 추 담아받아서야 돼 추종 추종케다 되니 된다리 진지 추무종케 맞잡려리시나 대마리 코란 속에 강다리한 심지 탐지라 송접 세코리데 애나 가속에 저라미니 송접시 톱컴도 대나기 상하기 냠리서 완휴차도 완디 정거건 타종그 송마 탐지베네 데도레 다 송마 탐지 가서 고송나기베네 송접지 세 파티 나도 마도 나근거도 세 망하레 데도 추종 포주도 모주 탐지 가서라 진짜다 할람 조진의 루다 드마견의 로는 가서 송접시인다 거지 다 대가서 남도 유부차네 코라조 때에서 진짜나 왕톱살 가서게 추종게 가디도 속대 휴차도 조보주차리 컨넥션주차리 컨넥션주차도 코라조 따바리 차나 가서라 로바시 조도 거리 로바시 조도 그나 타는 가서 뭐 아메리카가 라건 세컨도 트립 조리 세컨도 로바싱길라 대 마틴의 독자자한도 대 대나기리 코란소의 뒤전의 딩고리 사보 강고 말이 연도 딩 뒤뒤서 자훈라로다 창훈라오다 대니 코킨라오 가두예나 송마데 일라 딩네 대란 초반벌린 삼네 대 뒤뒤서 초반벌야다 닌럽 레섬 시탐나 라브린 초도 잡아리 마진의 대신들기나 대대게 나서라 딩연도 송접신다 거리래 추종 디 서도 송마시 송접신다 거래 디 서도 코란서 때서 진 코란서 데 커넥션을 주는 되게 나서라 핀통 좀 거린 직딩 감수 응답될 거리래 사니 현념은 초금 응답되네 되니 파티 살람 그 파티라 살람나 파티 용무제는 코란서 예니 요니 요 송접이네 할레바키 닝게본다비네 뭐게자키게는 닝게본다비네 나서라 송접이 좋는 거 디인도 대서 진고리 대리마도 저게 Yenja Menje, Choran Chu de Madi, 2 de Madi, Yomari, so like Gupawang to Desaratin Chu to Wed in the Yabori, then now get Naranga, Sam Korana, Namdodan, Redodan, Sinzang Tobatamji, Chatama the Tarta, Latan, Ransem, Yemiri, Sana, Chudon Zoli Omari, Lama Zomari, Yadam Zoma, Chudon Zomari. Cha Tama the Nag, Sam Long Jack along the Zotari, Sam Koranga Ripa Koranga along the Chatan Zotari, then the Zoba Chambers and the Dairy. Did they marry got an asola Tata Kalendo? Kaleo de Onga Katan Yabori, the Tene Yabo Chomason, Katan Eleka Yabori, the Tene Yabo Chomason, Tene Yabori, and Sani den Arians and the Redor, they into Korazo, there's a Musunchu to Edina, Dina ye mud part and Drevanda in the console of some jobs in the Coletta, teach it, there's a shoot to Edin Yaboli.
Generally speaking, there are two ways to look at Dharmapalas, the protectors. There is looking at them in the relative context, or the context of relative truth, and looking at them from the standpoint of absolute truth. Since your question appears to be primarily focused on why we relate to them in relative truth, I'll deal with that. We, as human beings, practitioners of Buddhism who are human, I mean our species is human, we have a couple of things about us. One thing is that humans are, I mean, Lama didn't use the word, but pack animals. We are pack animals, like dogs. And your cats, her cats are pack animals. Other cats are not, but hers are. I don't know why. So we're social. This goes, our need for society, human society and so on, goes deeper than culture or religious affiliation. It's a very, very deep need. And our need for, so as sentient beings, we have thought. That's one issue that needs to be responded to. And as human sentient beings in particular, we are social. We have family. We have groups. We have organizations. We have countries. All of these things are social entities. And then the third thing that goes along with the second thing is because of our thoughts and because of our being social animals, we need help. We not only need help, but we know we need help. We have created in our human societies in various ways all kinds of structures and professions that we could group together as helping professions. Whatever we may believe, we all know deep down that we cannot do it alone, whatever it is. Just in human society, no one can actually do it alone. So, when we turn to the spiritual path of Buddhism, we turn to it as obviously sentient beings with thoughts and all the problems that thoughts can cause, and as human beings with all the emotional and societal needs of human beings. So we want a family, we want a society, and we want help. We may say to ourselves, no, I only need the Buddha, I don't need anybody else, but we really deep down, we want help. So that's where we're starting out. So the thing about the Buddha, we can we can just think of all of them, all of the Buddhas and all of the deities and all the Dharmapalas as one to start with, like the sun. It is a full service. The Trikaya is a way to naturally respond to every single need that can be responded to on the part of any and all sentient beings. You know, the Buddha is not going to, the Dharmakaya is not going to refuse to meet needs that aren't the main thing. It's going to try to do everything. It just happens. So the Lama said the way it works is like you've got the sun, right? And then there's the sun's light, which we can think of as, yeah, it's the sun, but we can isolate it from the sun, distinguish it as a conceptual isolate at least. And then the actual rays that the light can break into. So those are like the Trikaya. So the sun itself is the Buddha, the Guru, and the light is the deities, the Yidans. But then there are these rays that can get in between the cracks and help. So the rays are the rays from the sun. They're not different. It's not farmed out. It's not like the Buddha, puts a classified ad in the paper and asks for non-human beings who will help his poor benighted practitioners. It's all the Buddha, but it's taking different forms. So we need society, and regardless of how monotheistic or mono whatever we think we are, we like more help rather than less help. And even when we create spiritual mechanisms that seem like they don't have a cast of thousands, they do. They turn out to. So we have thoughts, we need society, we need company, and we need help. So what is the stated function? If we reduce the function of Dharmapalas, using, Lama said, the classical terminology, how do we define them? What makes a Dharmapala different from a being who's not a Dharmapala? Dharmapalas are those who have promised to protect any practitioner of the Buddha's teachings like they would protect their own child. That is the job description. That is what they have all promised. Now, this doesn't mean that they don't protect non-practitioners, but to actually get into your business, they need to form a connection with you, or you with them, which is why we have empowerments for Dharmapalas. So their function is to facilitate your practice, to remove anything that will get in the way of your development, and to provide, as best as your karma will allow them, everything you need to progress further. So Lama said, really you can think of their function as, in that sense, dual. They keep you safe, not necessarily in the coarse sense, but they protect you from corruption, from things getting in that will somehow corrupt or derail your path. And they keep your attainment from dissipating. So they keep the stuff you don't want outside, and they keep the stuff you do want inside. Now, generally speaking, when we use the term Dhammapalas, we are talking about Buddha emanations that are not human. There are some cases where it's a little bit tricky. They might at least have been human at one point. But generally speaking, we're talking about beings that we normally can't see. when you form a relationship with them and give them, thereby give them the ability to help you directly, they follow you like your shadow. Whether you think of them or not, whether you like them or not, whether you have problems with the way they're depicted or not, they are going to follow you like your shadow. They are your best friend, whether you know it or not. Therefore, it is considered appropriate and polite to acknowledge that. So it's not the case that if we pray to these protectors and offer them cookies or tiny little cups of tea or whatever we have or something, that they'll protect us. And if we don't, they won't. It's not like that. They're going to protect us no matter what. But it's not saying thank you when someone does something for you is, we know better than that. So if you look at the liturgies, and we're a long-winded religion, right? I mean, if we can say something in 10 words or 100, let's try for 1,000. Half of it, we're asking them to protect the world, protect this, us, whatever, this place. And half of it, we're thanking them. We're saying thank you. And so this word sulka, sul, of course, is the same root as the word for prayer. But it also has a connotation of offering something that someone can consume. So it kind of means thanks and attention and Lama said it's a little bit like when you go to the restaurant, you always leave a tip because they're helping. It's not like, it's not like they wouldn't bring your food if you didn't leave a tip, but it's nice to leave a tip. And so that's what we do. So because we have thoughts, because we are still dualistic, because we still believe that there are different beings, we seem to be different beings, then we relate to them as different beings. We imagine them the way that they're described, and we call them by the names that they're given. But, of course, Lama said, in reality, they are complete within your awareness. But until we have realized that everything and everyone is complete within our awareness, we still need help. And therefore, it behooves us, for our own good especially, to be grateful, to be polite.
Thank you, Lama. That was a really good explanation.
Appreciate it. Really good. Thank you to go pay about Yarabu Juzari. Ngalati trap thank you to America pay about that. Ngate Karis and Ngalati Yamura Lem. The Rhine Clam New York, Penstration, Soin, train. Penstration, Naropa Magino. Magimog, suitcase chamber and the gun yagando, train. Ma Lincoln more lintermando. Magin lo chemborindo, Lapa Kaya de stock chasando. Yapochek, the driven zog, dumptamando. Then there's a net and tons of Mongorjek, the Ropa Golabs. Then in Ropa Majana, young Ropa sea chalk marizo, and a conyon di Lombadella. The conyon de Cablere. And to Ropa Gola, go sitting at the suitcase selling corner song. Then he penny penstration the Tokala Yakor, Toka Chukan Rogala, Magemo, more DC and Rogas. DC and Rosak drank Gohalang Pachirove, Ya Tesi, and other new young Rogo, the Trilla Omari. Mog Pakinani, Lapa Kayate, stroke Chazo, Kayate and the Rus in the Dinani Chesedoko. Garis again, Tacho Yapo Sons, Marimari Kaletical, white minutes. More dinner, Gomo Jondo. Gomo Jodanga Tekando. Garis and Arte Mogongarte Gomar. Please take this or I have this. My sister daughter this morning my daughter giving me something chorang lani kalasaji chis trees mari chorang te ngat te go mari tsawani nge lin chok mari nga tawari ngat te go mari nge ropa so kriza mari koche te khoro chis nga lapa na ya sa te magin de den ro de ti so so ropa singke te la chola thangke zo de sem no to de tin de 대 최종 담지가 이렇게 유나면은 가서 로바존도 그때 두두슨 추바베게 갑래 요마리 뭐 때인데 다 든르게 인사리 제게텔 로바베나 든르 인사리 디 커넥션도 인터디펜던도 든르리도사 콘소 효게 때 때야를 가본도 같더니 소소그 셈나 때라고 때사래 아요 로처리 야본도 와상도 거기래 셈 레건도 와대 로주리
Speaking of culture, actually, I think it might actually be more of a culturally appropriate practice here than anywhere else, because there is a strong tradition in American culture, especially. It is in other cultures as well, but I've noticed it most strongly in American culture of expressing your gratitude when someone is helpful to you. One time I was taking the train from the Rhinecliff station down to Penn Station in New York. And on the same train was seated nearby was an elderly woman who was also apparently a stroke survivor and therefore had trouble. She had a really big bag and was clearly not capable of handling it. Now, I knew enough by that point to know that you can't help someone without asking their permission first, because it's seen as some kind of insult. So I asked her, I said, may I help you? And she said, yes, please, I really can't manage this bag. So I helped her get her bag put away and so on. And when we got to Penn Station, I wanted to make sure she was able to get where she was going. And so I accompanied her with her bag, and I said, are you staying here or are you continuing on? She said, no, I'm making a connection to DC. I'm taking the I think we call it the Acela or whatever, from Penn to the main station in Washington. So I said, well, let me bring you to your next train because I have lots of time. I'm staying in New York for a few days. I'm not in any hurry. Let me get you there. So I brought her and got her onto her connection. And she reached with her one working hand into her bag or her pockets and pulled out a $10 bill. And she said, I'd like to give you this. My daughter gave me this to buy food, but you've been so kind, I want to give you this. And I said, initially I refused it. I said, no. I'm a monk. I'm a Buddhist monk. We're supposed to just help people. I didn't expect you, to give me a gratuity. And she said, but I'm really, really grateful. So please accept it. And I did. And I realized that it is, you're trained to express gratitude because you feel it and you naturally share, when you can. And I think that that's the attitude that to have with Dharmapalas. And Lama said it's not even about whether, like making sure they get it or, it's not, you don't have to like get an address and send a check or anything. It's the gesture. And it's really more about you than it is about them. It's that you feel gratitude. You accept their help and you acknowledge that, yeah, you needed help and they gave it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can thank you.
So I have a few questions here, and I've got to open my phone. I'll do one and then give it, and then I'll do the next, if we have time. So sometimes I know my Guru is aware of me as I walk through samsara. I know he hears my prayers, even when I'm suffering. Other times I have doubts. Is this experience accurate? Please dispel my doubts.
Stanza the Jinjin Lama deke ngarang te nam tok dong dungal tan de so ngus zigiore ngarang soa tapa de ngus senore ichi ores. That samsung demayam bage tetsom la ngane zigi eyena ngarang soa tapa sengi eyena ke tetsom zagidas. Tanrago bide.
Te chorang ngone dembari. Te chawa tela nga ha lepa gawo yo. Te ngone dembari. Nga tso namdo yo re. Namdo yo nga tso namdo le chor yo ma re. Namdo le chor me yung du tsam se ko lama la deba ke jie kao le re. Jie bar jien de lama de tu sam san je re. Lama ke tsama nga ken chin rak ndo sa. Lama tsam se chin ka re. Lama len chin ka chin ba ta men chin ba ni yo re lama la. Lama pachar te la dundrichi yore lamya lamja drapa jang lamna jang prewe nyamni seka yore lama toban thombo yen ma to te chare sarva tam sarva yore samsan chinkan do samni yore samsan lama ga kanya chinkan do o samdo ko le yore dundrichi kyanki mangbo yore ena ya chepar yo mari gadyu ena te lama gen chinke yo me ke jamari til samno te matong ngarang ke ta lama de ke ngarang la kare lam tingna de ngarang ke nyamni se ya lama de nga tharpa ta thamchin chimba lamtong khin ta lama de ngarang ke sepa khamsong kholon dam ni a drin hyawa nyang de kompal pha kun khin thartok konde nyamji chimbo jena de ha konki ga lamtong khin de nga lama de lame gari sing na nge de drokyen samni chona ga ngu ngo ko mi le ke nyamne chin do la deni de lam je to ba de kompel ro gari de kompel ro de lam salam jong ko de ma to je ke lama ga nga la ha ko ke yo ta mi lama ke thong ke yo ta mi lama salap de jok ke yo ta mi ko ga nam do ke je ba yo ya de Kare Lama George Raw Lama Late Seate Nazo Lama Tamik business Mari. Lama Kare Lamtong Gupat and Arog Yamni Segina, Tawa the compellant Rojoli. The compellant row the tea take Remji Lama Telas Tepa Cher and Roholia. The cups of Lama Salat Jordan Roholia. The dairy Mato Yin Lama Chinko Yori, Marika Samnote, Hiratong Yamiri, Karesina Tendruka Samno Tonsaka Lojo, Mambo Yori, Lama Chinsa Yabori, Lama Michinka Sika Yabo Yori, Kanta Yanghaju J Yori, Nagalama Sancho Dorje, Kongdana, Mag Semnani, Samno Tonsi in Chiri, Salavate Tenagi, Kona, Medambaranagi, Yori, the Chin Chiri, Karesina, Yazakon. Trugarela Tavani Kong Gila Sondo, Gilan Drone Capsula, Trugarela, Trugate Pachar Tavain Samari, Trugate Jasa Habanda, Gimnig Dorjin Zamanda in Sari. The Lama Tepachimbo, Nanjin Drogo Cho and Roset. Trava de Gelong Zonzong Zambanda Sabon Zin of Miro Sari. Then the Lama Sajo Dorjin Haguri, Gyamyori, Tratari, and a Tawa de Conte de Hako Samari, the Tawa de Salago, or Mojic and Gil and Rogo Narson, that con Trahan the Chamain, the Galong the Chamain, the Nata and Jindu Saboma Chami. That things out Tendrick Mambo Yori, Nan Jindu Chandami, con Chambari, in the Pagina in Sari. Cheraki Tepa, Cherry Nana Song Jiz, then Consani Jantong, Panchana, Jantong, Dija Sari Tawat. Then some note on Tawateg, Mata Lama de Karinda Song the Kunati, Gohani, the do and the Jing Yin Sari. The do with Zeng Yin do. Lama can change on the one. The Trogadilla, Gosses, Sonros. Trogadega Lamazon can go over to saying the Kogo need there. Or being in the Chinese Chomari, Tonga getting a gate at Chenyon documari, Pajo, Goha Lama, Sonros. They didn't change the Lama. Go Sanam Madop called the Lama. Then the Lama can chinking already, that Lama may chinking already. They are around the sock business as a morning. Aranzoga Lama take a lamp carry to one and daughter in the 10 yamni matun say at it. That rank don't sort that they.
I really like this question because I think it really comprises much of our experience. As came up during my answer to the preceding question, we are beset by thoughts. And our thoughts can take any different form, and therefore it's not unreasonable or unexpected that at times we will feel confident about our gurus actually seeing us and hearing our prayers, and at other times we will doubt. And the reason why these two attitudes tend to fluctuate or tend to both occur is because we simply don't know. We can't know. Usually we don't see any direct evidence of whether or not our gurus see us and hear us. In reality, it's possible that sometimes your guru sees you and hears you, and at other times doesn't. If they're fully awakened, then they are aware of you constantly. But if they're still on the path themselves, then they may or may not be aware of you at any particular time. But since there are two reasons why we shouldn't spend time worrying about this. The first is simply that we cannot know. So when we start to wonder or speculate, does my guru see me or not? Does my guru hear my prayer or not? Since we can't know, we're just subjecting ourselves to another thing to worry about that is not actually going to help us. There's no action required here. There's nothing we can do more than pray. The other reason not to spend time thinking about this is that the knowledge by your guru of what you are experiencing and your prayers is, of course, a wonderful thing, but it's not their main function. The main job of your guru is to teach you what to practice and how to practice it. The main function of the guru is to show you how to practice in such a way that you will transcend samsara. Your practice will not be enhanced by speculation about whether your guru sees you or doesn't see you, hears you or doesn't hear you. You will not receive the blessings of your guru more quickly by entertaining such speculation. Your practice will flourish and you will receive your guru's blessing principally through practicing. So practicing what the guru taught is of paramount importance, not attempting to figure out, which you can't do anyway, whether the guru sees you or not. So therefore, in a sense, Lama said, you can say that it's none of your business. It's none of your business whether the guru sees you and hears you right now. or doesn't. Because that's not really the main thing in your relationship. The main thing in your relationship is very, very simple, very straightforward. The Guru teaches you how to achieve awakening, you do it. That's it. As your practice progresses, however, your faith in your Guru will naturally increase. As your faith naturally increases, you will naturally receive more of your Guru's blessing. And that we can know, because that you can experience, that gradual change, that gradual improvement. But to worry on a day-by-day basis, does the Guru see me now, does the Guru hear me now, or doesn't they? It's fruitless, because you're never really going to know. You are speculating about something that can neither be proven or disproven. Now, there are, of course, many stories of great masters who do know not only what their principal disciples are going through, but what others are going through. One of my own teachers, the master of Gyamtso Dorje, was one of these. At one point, a tulku and a monk, two different people, were going to go see him. And the tulku was not a monastic, and the monk was very much a monastic and very conscious of that. And the tulku wanted to go and see Gyamtso Dorje, and the monk kind of didn't really. You know, he thought this Lama, he's well known, but he's a lay person, he's got a wife. And he said to his companion, the tulku, he said, you go ahead and see him. I said, I'm going to stay here and just have tea. I don't really need to see. There's a lot of his kind nowadays. I don't really want to mess with it. So the tulku went in and had an audience with Gyamtso Dorje. And the monk was outside drinking tea, and he started to get curious. He said, I wonder what that old guy is saying to my friend the tulku. And so he put his ear to the door very, very carefully, didn't make a sound, and tried to listen in. At which point, Gyamtso Dorje said to the tulku, he said, would you please be so kind as to open that door? And the tulku did. And Gyamtso Dorje looked at the monk and said, you don't need to stay there listening to what I say, because you've made it clear you don't want to hear anything I have to say. So why don't you just leave? And so he knew, and knew that there was no point.
Lama Lama Kempo Zebado, the love young the Zokin called Halepari, Zokin Japuru, Conden, Canyon. Halepari. Con Lama Achunden, Jilan Dolicas, Lama Juga, Jetaman Bonancoli, Jetaman Bonan, Machotam, Jikandra, Namshikandra, the Take Court, the Take Court, the Mambo Songari. I do. They Zebado, Sala, the Lamadan, they con Zebado, Huotin, Machason Tandra. Ramandari Chasoni, I Tanam Hit, Tesari Yapori or Sami Samnire, Hungo Hu and Mina Samni, Tandraki Huotinire, Lamalaya, Jeda Hundo, Teta, Namki Kandari, and Asoga, Rumdo, the country dog was at the Lama Chik, Zenzi Rogerson. Lama Jun the Ru thing is an Yode, the Masondo, Mason, the old Corte Tenderindo, Tenderindo, the song. Huonite, Tesare, Chatankori, Konga, Chutukor, the Mangteri. Lama Songdankor, no biti samnire, no tea samnire, Sebadorje, Toparikendo. I Lama Chatan Chinis and Chinko in no song samnire, call Sebadorje, Topar, Senani Kendo, Jet Lama. What? Yes, the Bakanga no Kario Consamsa, no tea, choke them by your song, so make Jiguda, choke them by Konga, no till or Tendurio Tendu. Sebado.
De mixer de la Lama ge no song yana nor cigarettes some chengio.
Some not North Secret
or North Secret.
No, North Secret or North on read or chot them by your Tadari, they tender sound. They come out song so that they didn't Sebado Conga. Oh, Takus 각 예지마도 센나니 또바상이 제푸사마리 라멘 친로근도 산니르게 제제도 대바제 송송네 공의 예조들 라멘 드른 친로로서 대 공의 희산나 참사 칸이마 노거리 대오 드르리서 라마 친거리다.
So Lama said that one of his teachers, the Khenpo Tsepak Dorje, from whom he received a lot of teachings on the mind training and also Dzogchen, and especially the transmissions of a lot of background Dharma concerned with the Dzogchen, once was present in a group in the teaching room of Khenpo Achuk. This is Achuk. We have to exaggerate because otherwise I can't hear the difference. So Achuk. And one of the things for which Khenpo Achuk was frequently consulted by people was what the state and needs of people who had recently died were. So in other words, how best to help them, how best to meet their posthumous needs. And so he would give clear answers to these things. He would say, well, this person's like this, and probably if you did this, that would be the most useful, and this one's in such and such situations, and this would be most useful, and so on. So at one point, Khenpo Tsepak Dorje was listening to this, and one of the recently deceased people that was being asked about when Khenpo Achuk was describing the person's current whereabouts and situation and what their needs were, Khenpo Tsepak Dorje thought, he didn't say anything, but he thought, that doesn't sound right. I think he's wrong. I don't think that's right. He didn't say anything. But suddenly, Khenpo Achuk looked at him and said, you know, you're right. I could be wrong. I could be wrong about that. You're right to think that. And when he said that, of course, Khenpo Tsepak Dorje thought, oh, wow. You know, I have to watch what I'm thinking. Because I just thought for a moment he might be wrong. And then he responded as though I'd said it to him. I said, I didn't say anything. I didn't make a face or anything like that. Yeah.
All right, there's more questions here. Okay.
Anyone in the room? Or no? Because we have time for one more. So Naomi, one more? Or one in the room? Yeah, I think that lady, yeah.
Thank you, Rinpoche. I have a great difficulty with wrathful aspects of deities, and not so much with Vajrayogini, Vajravaraha, or Ekajati, but Vajracharya, Chakrasamvara, Vajrapirava, especially in Yabyum, the wrathful aspects I find very disturbing. So I wanted to find out how it could be a better relationship.
Okay. Da moge de chapa nyingpa yansare. Nyamlen katso yume mi she de lo mompong na tonyo. Tromo ge rik pena jesun doje na drama jomonga chisoma de dawo yana de gauya. Dela magawa kamen. Tro pogi zu pena doje porba dang kolo demjo dawo dang Palchen Shinji she dawo dezo tona mixa ke tro yembala yum yapache ke yap ke so de nawa dezo la te sam madewa tragidos de kare
데데 다 저랑게 소소라데 자족단게 등한제 레전드와 예담사에는 라마에는 저 추조는 예담근저와 컨넥션라고데 에모셔널 된 오리 된가 가레가 가레 통이히다나 데라 냠니데 조진도 인달 먹었다고 말이 짜고 말이 차창고 사제게 자 랭안이 마 저니 영안이 저니 장장리도들이 여외나 얍장있는다 야변 송전있는다 니가라 거기 강다량 그 랑체가 거니 탑기 송족원의 요리 동이 그 찬이 염다 대화 그 찬이 얍존 사와 그 찬이 염다 동바 그 찬이 염자 다때 차창데 뒤전도 매바 요리 우르게 찐라 띠네 저 혈다 마혈게 야병게 야와를 세월이 짜르게 짜체 정릉은 희월마도 야병세야데 송조세야데 랑체서 요리가 저라 에나데 포주 모주다 혀와다 혀마초데 소소가 간 무빠라 비 곰돌라 라 용조공 오트는 두르콜레티 찌파린돌이야 근데 저런 여담 도르제 남절마다 대무나 여담 도르제 남절마 곰돌라 대 찌포근 저거들이 인다라 야소 장이 짜 마짜게 잔도데 메와가 토니 곰돌라 근데 여담 도르제 남절마 공오라 장이 요마린 잔도 요마리 빵안 요마리 레도 요마리 장조 요마리 가도 요마리 대 여담 도르제 남절마리 맞아 pomochiara mare marange langder te yadam dorje namjama yemi ke chayo mare nanim seven the kerama lang do mare la yadam dorje namjama yemi chama soso ke te emotional latin te tendrisha ke nanko le ma to tujando me pa de la seria te rang ke sem da yermi yamba te yadam dorje namjama ran se thamdi pa yermi yamba te ta teni sanje thamjin de pongo wo jaryam dorje namjama de yen samdu jina then Joran la Tamjigum Jonko, La Yindali Kudo Dagumari.
Usually, these strong responses that we have toward the appearance of different deities, whether it's because of the color of the deity, or the gender of the deity, or the Buddha family with which the deity is associated, are caused by karmic imprints that have ripened or solidified as actual channels in our brain. So in other words, they're kind of maybe hardwired into our current bodies, since our bodies are the karmic, are the full ripening of our previous karma. So it's probably something that is like a neuronal pathway for you, and that's the way it is for most of us. And the solution to this is actually quite clear in your question itself. It's because of our own beginningless history, we have these natural affinities. And because we have affinities, we also have the opposite. We have things that just don't move us, or we can't relate to, or we may even find frightening and off-putting. The thing to remember is that in reality, in truth, all of these different deities are the same thing. And to accord with the different dispositions and tendencies of different beings, that same thing, to use the term thing, manifests as what we call the five families. Because we experience gender, those five families can be divided into male and female, each of them. Because we are emotional and experience fluctuations of emotion, then each of those 10, the five fathers and the five mothers of the five families, can appear either peaceful or wrathful. And it's not that any one of those 20, and then we can subdivide it endlessly after that, is better. They're all the same. It's just that one or another, one or more of those, is just going to naturally feel good to us. And so, on the one hand, you want to be free of judgment about the ones that you don't feel any hankering for, and recognize that each and every one of these deities, however they appear, is complete, is the complete presence of the awakened mind, that each of them is a way to communicate something. So, although, for example, when you talk about males and female deities, it is not the case that a male deity is incomplete without his female consort, or that the female deity is incomplete without a consort. But when they're shown with a consort, it is bringing home the idea of completeness. So in other words, the male aspect in union with the female aspect shows that either one of them is complete, that they're not really two different things, that the deity, whether it is shown with a consort or not, is not just lucidity, but not emptiness. The lucidity, usually associated with the male deity, is inseparable from emptiness. Because sometimes we dualize. We think, well, the mind's lucidity is one thing and the mind's emptiness is something else. But they're not two different things. They're conceptual isolates. We can think of them separately, but they are not two different things. So in order to show that they're not two different things, we show them as two deities in union, because it's a powerful and strongly, strongly embedded symbol of non-duality for us. But if that symbol doesn't work for someone, then they would meditate on the deity that wasn't in that form. And the effect is going to be the same. So you want to, on the one hand, be free of judgment and recognize that however they appear, none of them is bad or scary. On the other hand, while being free of judgment, you also want to respect your own natural inclinations and work with that. So, for example, if you find the deity Vajrayogini appealing, then meditate on her, meditate on Vajrayogini. But recognize that Vajrayogini is not really a young woman forced to stand naked until the end of time, balancing on one leg. She is the freedom, the original and unchanging inherent freedom of your mind, of everyone's mind, beyond judgment, beyond dualism, beyond splitting things into subject and object. That is Vajrayogini. But if the symbol of the deity's form works for you, then take advantage of that.
I'm thinking about how one can be more comfortable, what methodology in order to, achieve what you're saying.
이는데 람 정way 가서 간다 공부도.
람 좀 값서 라 세야데 르과기 짠니 철캬르니 가 ngo네 단네 담보키게다 가 샘그 짠낭니 철낭와니 캬르니 트르포고용 조서베니 캬르니리야 람 장니 값서라 키 라이 조던 시먼 점바 남도데 쩨 마송와 라 옌바르 그 조다데 고 다다 베제 요기니 다다 텐달리 젠제 조르 낭데 디바 낭와데 동바데 낭킹기 히바데라 낭저가 라데니 낭동파 인미든 리송와 낭이게 낭니 라데 조르 트바든 시먼 점베게 쟁자레 든르케 마바르게 토니 남도데 파히기라 남도데 자마소기리 라검비데 마도 라르 자 힌소나 ngoné chik ma tablir ke hin ri da la hin nang khoral hin nan dan da ri ti hin cha de ke ma song ni la khorang ke zuk de nang wa ke nang de yo ba ri la nang ki de ko tong ba ri la de tong ba ri di song jok ngo ga long ni de ni za gom thap so na de ni ngome la ya da ba ri rom ri da 동양 다바라 하콘르 마도 제게 다다데 시만즈바 남도 되게 쟁소나 대근저 거마리 데고 나서 그마 검딜레 찍바리 녀모리 남도 검돌레 마도 남도레 열린데 바 강마리 람장니 갑슬라 데라 잡잡이 걸레 마도 제게 라비나 검제데 제람이 로당리 코사티 다사미나 렘지 검야 데페 쳔모리.
Well, the way to make use of this iconography, the way to cultivate the path, the way to become comfortable with it, is to remember the truth. And the truth is that these deities are nothing other than the natural reflection of your own mind's innate attributes. They're not external entities that you're trying to introduce into your life or that you're trying to transform yourself into. If we fixate on the image of the deity, the somewhat human-like attributes of the deity, then we're missing the point. Because the point of the deity is vivid, glaringly vivid appearance that has no existence, no substantiality. And those two things, the emptiness of the deity and the vivid appearance of the deity, while conceptually distinct, are in reality the same thing. What makes the deity a deity is that it couldn't be a thing. It couldn't be a real as it appears. So rather than being an image that forms a trap for thoughts and clinging, it's the opposite of that. The image itself, if understood, forces you to transcend conceptual thinking. You know, if you think of the deity as a person, then it's no different than directing your mind to the form of a living person. It's just another object of attachment or of obsession. The point is, it's not something that is or could be out there. It utterly transcends that. The outrageous appearance of the deity, even the peaceful deities, is something that cannot be a conventional impure phenomenon. So the point is to let the imagery take effect on you as communication, as symbolic teaching, and not to fixate on the attributes per se. Honest, that's a zoe. So now we're out of time.
Yeah, we are out of time. Restart. Oh, okay, thank you. Oh, Zonam Daye Damji Zebani Domne Nibe Rana Bamzi Jega Namje Balavan Roba Ye Siben Zolen Roba Yo Gewan Dei Jewogo Zona Yige Zozot Sona Yige Le Zanwe Tamba Gani Doba Yo Sanjo Zemne Rambo Maji Bana Jije Jeba Nyamba Meba Goni Gondo Bewa Yo Simji Tamji Dedan Denjaraji Ngendo Tamji Tada Tombara Sanjo Zamba Ganda Zaryo Ba Deda Ganje Mo Yo Zanje Reje Zenzen Dambe Ga Jargan Deja Danda Lemba Sabje Mezon Jeve Sanga Ju Sige Zonda Jabe Dorje yo.
Thank you.
Very much. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night, and see you tomorrow morning. Hopefully. Hopefully, no? Good.